Hey everybody, Matthew here, CanadianRenegade.com. Today I'm going to talk about the Alberta carbon tax brought in by the Nutley government. Sorry, I meant Notley, NDP government. So stay tuned. Okay, so my thoughts on the Alberta carbon tax. I was actually doing a fair bit of research on this, and believe it or not, I don't think it's as big of a disaster as I originally thought. I still don't like it. It's still a terrible idea, but it's not quite as bad as I had first envisioned after doing a little bit of research. So the first thing I want to do is go over some of the facts regarding the carbon tax. It's basically on carbon fuels or carbon emitting fuels. For gasoline, it's about 4.5 cents per liter. Diesel is 5.35 cents a liter. Natural gas will be $1 a gigajoule, $1.01 a gigajoule, something like that. And propane is 3 cents a liter. Additionally, I did do a little bit of digging, and coal is being increased by about $35 a ton. The article was about 6 days old, but it said that coal was about $42 a ton, and the carbon tax would increase it by $35 a ton, up to 70-some a ton. So that's a rundown of the carbon taxes. The Notley government is insisting that it's not going to affect most families, that there's a carbon rebate, and that people aren't actually going to have to pay more out of their budget. But despite the assurances, I'm not really buying it completely, and I'll kind of get into why, and why this is still going to affect families. It's still going to affect the cost of living, and why it's really going to affect businesses, which is really not what we need right now. So the rebates this year are $200 for a single person, $300 for a couple, and a maximum, or it looks like $360 for a couple with 2 children. And then, of course, in this chart here, they've made some assumptions about what your fuel uses are going to be, and basically that you actually have a net gain in income even after the carbon tax is added in. Now, like I said, there's a lot of assumptions here. I'm not necessarily going to trust the government's assumptions on how much fuel that people are using, but it's really all that I have to go off of right now. There have been some other assessments that have gone and said that it would cost a family as much as $2,000 a year more, but that's probably factoring other costs going up like food and other utilities like electricity, which we'll get to in a second. So those rebates are for a single person making $47,500 or less, a couple making $95,000 or less. If you make between $95,000 and $100,000 for a couple, you get a half rebate, and if you make over $100,000 for a couple or $51,250 for a single person, you'll just get half rebate, and anybody over that amount will get no rebate at all. So basically it's the middle income, upper middle income, not even upper middle income. I mean, I don't think that upper middle class starts until the family's making maybe $150,000 a year. So really it's middle income and upper middle income that's taking the brunt of this carbon tax, which I guess that's probably what they're looking to do. I mean, the NDP is basically a socialist / communist type of political party, and people with extremely low incomes that are living in apartments and not driving, they're probably not going to do too badly with this carbon tax. They'll probably actually get a fair bit of money more back than what they're paying in actual taxes. But they're still going to suffer when the cost of food goes up, the cost of electricity, and other things that the government's not including in these estimates start to compound. The government did mention that electricity would not have a carbon tax, but they're not completely honest about that, because the primary producers of electricity in Alberta right now are coal producing. There's also some natural gas production. There's some hydro. The coal producing plants and the natural gas plants are going to be subject to carbon taxes on the fuels that they use to produce the electricity. So you will be getting taxed indirectly on your electricity prices, they're just not including it in their estimates. So, like I said, it's kind of, you have to be skeptical of the government numbers. So a couple other things I came across was there is a farm exemption for farm fuels. Those are the colored fuels. And, you know, I don't think that the government would have done that if it wasn't for people putting pressure on the government. You know, there's already going to be costs of food increases due to increased transportation costs, increased processing costs at processing plants, and then shipping things back to the store. So I do feel like food will creep up a little bit because of this carbon tax, especially over time. But at least the farmers aren't getting hit directly. That was one of the things that I was surprised about. The other thing is that small businesses are getting a tax cut, a provincial tax cut from 3% down to 2% on profit. I think this is less significant than it sounds. On the government website, they kind of made it out like they're, you know, a bunch of heroes for doing that or something. But if you're not making any profit, then it doesn't really matter what the tax rate is, right? So if your business's fuel costs have increased dramatically, and now you're making less profit, you have less profit to be taxed. So I don't think this is actually going to work out that well for a lot of small businesses. I work for a small to medium-sized business. It's a roofing company. We have a fairly large fleet of trucks, and we can't just flick a switch and reduce our fuel consumption. We're probably going to have to stick with these trucks until they wear out, and even at that time, you know, you need certain vehicles for certain jobs. You can't roof using like a smart car or some sort of tiny little compact truck. Sometimes you need to haul around big loads, and this requires large trucks. So we're not really going to be able to reduce, at least at my business, our fuel costs very much. So, and I know we're not really a small business, but for a small company, a family-owned business, a family-owned construction company, the people that are actually struggling right now because construction is down, because the economy is bad, they're not really going to get any benefit from a reduced income tax because they're probably not making as much money. So now that I've talked about some of the specifics of this carbon tax plan, why am I so against it, you might ask? You might say, you know, I'm living in a tiny house, I'm into permaculture, you know, why am I not environmentally friendly? You know, I am an environmentalist. But my main objection to the carbon tax is that I don't believe in anthropogenic global warming. I do believe in climate change. I do believe that the climate has warmed over the last few decades. I'm just not buying that it's all carbon dioxide. There are plenty of other activities that man engages in that affect temperature. You know, when we cut down a forest and turn it into a field, that raises the temperatures in that area because a field radiates more heat. It's not as shady, especially a plowed field. It radiates a lot more heat than a forest. Absorbs and radiates a lot more heat. And then when we take that same field and turn it into a massive parking lot for a big box store and it's covered in asphalt, it gets even hotter. So that's just one way that we alter the temperature. But we're being told by the narrative is, the official narrative, is that we're being told that it's all carbon dioxide, that's the entire problem, let's not worry about any other side issues, and to deal with carbon dioxide, we're just going to tax you. We're just going to increase your cost of living. And increasing the cost of energy, that basically is just bad for the economy in general, and it's bad for our standard of living. It makes us less competitive with countries like China. We're already less competitive. Well, let's add a tax and be even more uncompetitive. And the other thing that I don't like about carbon taxes is basically they're the modern equivalent of indulgences. So if you're familiar with the Catholic Church a little bit, I don't remember the exact time frame, but for a while there was this thing called an indulgence. So you could sin, you could do something that you weren't supposed to do, as long as you paid the church a fee or a tax, whatever you want to call it, and then it was okay. They would forgive you and you wouldn't have to feel guilty anymore. Well, that's basically, the modern equivalent of that is basically the carbon tax. So, you know, you're bad because you want to live, and in order to live, you have to burn carbon or create carbon to heat your house, to drive to work, etc., etc. And so you're bad, but we'll make it better, just pay us money. And then you don't have to feel guilty anymore. So that's basically what I feel a carbon tax is in a nutshell. And I feel like there's a lot of, if you actually believe in anthropogenic global warming, I'm not, this show, I'm not trying to convince you otherwise. I'm going to do shows in the future where I get into it a lot more detail, so you'll know where I'm coming from. But if you actually believe in it, there's still other ways that we can address these problems without increasing directly and indirectly your cost of living. And I think when it comes to government, they're always looking for more money and more control. It's a trend that you'll notice throughout history. Over time, governments always want bigger coffers, and they want to interfere more because that's what governments do. Okay? And so, you know, the reason why the government has jumped on the carbon taxes so much and have really gotten behind it is because other tax increases or other types of taxes are no longer palatable, especially with basically a failing economy that we have these days. And so if the government was to push for a large increase in income tax, that would be unpopular. If the government was to push for large increases in property taxes or in sales taxes, that would be unpopular. But by making people feel guilty, by saying that the earth is in danger, we're destroying the earth, we're going to reach a tipping point, right? It brings about you've created a problem, it brings about a sense of urgency, and now probably close to 50% of the population is in support of carbon taxes. So that's it for today. Please remember to subscribe, like this video, and share it with your friends. And, you know, if you've disagreed with some of the things that I've said today, you know, leave a comment. I'd be glad to interact with the people that watch my videos. And, you know, yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.